Hey nerds! So I've renamed my sci-fi club Archive 42. I said this to someone the other day thinking, because it makes perfect sense in my brain, and they were like, I don't get it. And I've just decided to accept it because I still like the name of it. So going into Archive 42 today is Apple TV's sci-fi hit Dark Matter Season 1. Now, the TV show is based on the 2016 book by Blake Crouch, and Season 1 does follow the storyline of the book pretty much exactly through to the conclusion, while also adding in like some extra content for the side characters as you normally would see with an adaptation, which then kind of allows it to open the door for a Season 2, which is coming out August 28th. Now, when the book came out, there was extremely high praise for it, and there was a lot of reviews saying it was an absolutely mind-bending feat in science fiction. Andy Weir even blurbed it. I also read it. Now, before I do this, I want to be very honest. I did not like the book. Specifically, I felt that the science was sloppy. I felt that the conclusion of the story didn't fit with the world building as written. I thought it broke its own rules about the science, and I did personally find the book to be incredibly misogynistic. Like, look, full disclosure, at the time, I remember saying that I felt like it read like a horny 15-year-old boy writing fantasy. I do not like to be critical to this degree. Like, I always want to respect the work that like many people put in order to publish a book. And just because I feel a certain way doesn't mean it's objectively true. It's just my personal response to it and how I felt about it. Now, I'm not going to go on about the book here. That's not what this review is. But I would love to know if you read it and what you thought of it. So for this review, though, I do want to just focus on the TV show only. I try to come to adaptations as fresh as possible, but I will say that when I started episode 1, I saw that Blake Crouch himself is the showrunner, and so I will admit that given my reaction to the book, I went in with very low expectations.
Lower your expectations a few.
Now, hi, if you are new here, I'm Abby, I'm a physicist, and I like to talk about science in pop culture, and this is my sci-fi review series. And if you are new here and this is your thing, then please do hit the like button and hit that subscribe as well.
Something happened to me, but you wouldn't believe me if I told you.
Before we go any further, I have to address a major mischaracterization that absolutely infuriated me about both the book and the TV show. This is a story about a brilliant physicist who wins the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for his work relating to quantum mechanics. Do you know what is not a part of this story? One of the biggest mysteries in the field of physics: dark matter. It's a silly thing to complain about. Look, I get it. I'm not going to complain about it like that much. It's fine. But I do think in the context of a science fiction novel about a theoretical physicist called dark matter, to not actually have anything to do with dark matter is just a little bit taking the piss, right? This is sort of a season 1 recap and a review of the science that is showcased in the TV show. So there will be spoilers. Dark Matter follows Jason Desson, a physicist and college professor living in Chicago with his wife Daniela and their son Charlie. Now, many years ago, Jason and Daniela made a choice. Daniela became pregnant and they decided to have their child. Jason stepped away from his research career, Daniela stopped painting and took a job running a gallery, and they built a fairly normal life together. But in another version of our universe, another Jason and Daniela made a different choice. They didn't have their child. Daniela went on to become a very successful artist, and Jason became one of the most famous physicists in the world. He wins the Pavia Prize, which I'm assuming is supposed to be like the Nobel Prize. And more importantly for the story here, this Jason creates the box. And Jason, too, isn't happy. Now, the box allows someone to access different versions of reality. We'll get into exactly what the show is claiming is happening like scientifically in a minute, but essentially Jason 2 can move between different versions of his life. He has everything that Jason 1 gave up. He has the career, the recognition, the incredible scientific achievement, but what he doesn't have is Daniela and Charlie. So rather than dealing with that regret in any like healthy or reasonable way whatsoever, he finds the version of himself who made the choice he wishes he had made, kidnaps him, puts him into the box, dumps him into Jason 2's world, and then just steps into his life. Jason 1 wakes up in this completely different reality where everyone around him thinks he is this brilliant physicist who built the box. He apparently lives with Amanda, who is a psychologist working at Velocity Labs, who are definitely the bad guys. And he has absolutely no idea what is happening. Eventually, Amanda realizes that this is not their Jason and helps him escape. They go back into the box, and then for most of the season, the two of them are moving through different worlds trying to find Jason 1's home. Meanwhile, Jason 2 is living Jason 1's life with Daniela and Charlie. However, it might not be all that he had hoped for. There's a point where he talks about having expected this life to be perfect, and obviously it isn't. There are things about Jason 1's life that he doesn't know. Like, he doesn't know that Charlie had a twin who died. He doesn't know about Charlie's nut allergy. There are these little details that begin to give him away, but it's more than that. He's trying to force Daniela and Charlie into this life that he has imagined and built up. A life that he thinks they would have had if he had made a different decision all those years ago. But he isn't the man who made that choice. No matter how closely he might resemble Jason 1, he hasn't lived that life. He hasn't spent those years with Daniela. He hasn't raised Charlie. He doesn't understand all of the things that happened between that one decision and the life that exists now. Now, I think it is completely normal to wonder about the path not taken. Like, what would my life have looked like if I had made a different choice? What if I had taken that job? Or what if I'd stayed with that person or moved somewhere else? And Dark Matter gets to literally walk through those doors and look. But I think what Jason 2 discovers is that getting the thing that you regret not choosing doesn't necessarily satisfy you. The life that you imagine you would have had is not something you can just step into years later because you haven't become the person who lived it. Maybe Jason 2 could have gone back to Daniela in his own world. Maybe they could have reconnected. They could have built some kind of new relationship. If having a family was something that he realized he desperately wanted, there were ways that he could have changed his own life. Instead, he tries to claw back a choice from the past and force himself into the outcome he thinks would have made him happy. Now, that's basically like the human or the social story behind the plot. So let's now talk about the science story that lets us explore these themes.
Behind every door in there is a version of your life that you could have lived.
So the science background to Dark Matter is centered around quantum mechanics, but specifically around the concept of superposition and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics, you probably know this already, is notoriously difficult to understand. There are a lot of quotes out there, mostly attributed to Feynman, about, oh, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. And I think that becomes very confusing for people because you have physicists saying you can't understand quantum mechanics while also saying that you need to trust that quantum mechanics works. That's kind of a difficult place to put people in when it is already a concept that is difficult for us to find good analogies to describe. Essentially, quantum mechanics is the field of physics where the laws and rules of how interactions behave on an atomic scale are different to how things behave on the classical scale. And when we say the classical scale, what we mean is the scale of you and me. Rolling a ball down a hill, or how a car drives, or a plane through the air, these are things that we see and interact with on a scale that is comparable to us on a daily basis. And describing how that all works is done through classical physics. But when people started looking at much smaller scales, at atoms and electrons and what was happening inside matter, they started to realize that the normal rules we were using weren't really applying anymore. things were breaking or they weren't working the way that was expected. And eventually, after a couple of decades of all of this stuff happening, we got the development of quantum mechanics. One of the things that I think is important here is that Heisenberg's approach was essentially to stop trying to describe what an atom looked like or trying to understand the interactions based on like how we thought they should look. And instead, what he did was he focused on what we can actually measure. Like, forget about what the picture in your mind is. Forget about how we think it should behave. What properties can we measure? And then from those measurements, can we come up with a description of what is happening? And that's where I think some of the difficulty we have with quantum mechanics comes from. Because we're talking about a scale that is so small, there's no analogy to anything in our daily lives. There's no way for us to talk about quantum mechanics in a way that is easily explained by comparing it to the normal world that we see around us. And when you think about it, that is how we learn things. When we're trying to help each other understand something, we always try to find some way to connect it to something familiar to us. It's essentially what I do on this channel by using science fiction and pop culture to help explain science. The problem with quantum mechanics is that it's not really like anything else. We can create analogies, and science communicators do that all of the time. But then those analogies can also create confusion because they're just approximations. So when people say quantum mechanics is difficult to understand, I don't think that it's about your ability to understand it. It's about there being no comparable thing in the natural world around you that you can use to understand the behavior and interactions happening on a quantum scale. But what we can do is learn how to use it. We can learn what the interactions are, we can measure them, we can test them, and we have found over the past 100 years that quantum mechanics keeps passing every test thrown at it. This is where the idea of shut up and calculate comes from. Now, look, not all physicists agree with that approach, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily the right way to think about it, but there are basically two conversations you could have. There is the mathematical understanding of quantum mechanics. We can use the mathematics, we can make predictions, test them, and use those principles to create technology. The fact that a laser works the way a laser does comes from our understanding of quantum mechanics. But then there is the philosophical question around quantum mechanics. What does it mean for reality? What does it mean for our perception of reality? What does it tell us about the world around us? The mathematical understanding is extremely well tested. The philosophical question is where you then get different interpretations. The most commonly taught interpretation is the Copenhagen interpretation. So most people are taught elements of it without necessarily being told that this is what you're being taught, particularly the idea of wave function collapse. But there are lots of different interpretations. And one of the other very well-known ones is the many worlds interpretation. And this brings us back to the TV show. And to understand where dark matter is getting its idea from, we need to talk about superposition. So very loosely, in quantum mechanics, a system can exist in a superposition of possible states. When you take a measurement, you get an actual resulting value. In the usual wave function collapse description, those possibilities collapse down and you get one definite result. What many worlds says is that those other possibilities don't simply disappear. All of the possible outcomes continue to exist, but you only experience the branch associated with the result that you got. And then you get into the much more philosophical discussion of whether that is a purely mathematical description or whether it has some analog in physical reality. This is where people start talking about actual physical worlds. A version of you where one thing happened and then another version where something else happened, all existing separately. And this is essentially what dark matter takes and turns into the premise of the show. It takes the quantum idea of superposition and then it scales it up to a human being. Jason goes into the box and somehow enters this superposition of possible realities. The show then visually represents that as this corridor with all of these doors, where each door can open up into a different version of reality. And I actually really liked that. What the show also does, though, is it connects it to consciousness. Ryan creates this drug that suppresses part of the brain in a way that somehow allows Jason to perceive and interact with the superposition, so that he can consciously interact with all possible states and choose an outcome. This is entirely fictional. I just want to be clear about that. There is no evidence that consciousness has this kind of an effect on quantum mechanics, and there is no evidence that suppressing part of the brain would allow you to observe or move between different quantum states. But I do want to say that I actually don't have a problem with that as the premise of the story. Like, I have no problem with them scaling the particle in a box idea up to a human in a box. I have no problem with like the corridor and the doors, or even them using consciousness and the observer effect as part of this fictional narrative that allows for the story to happen. But quantum mechanics is already misrepresented and misunderstood in pop culture a lot, particularly when it comes to consciousness. The observer effect is often described as if your consciousness is somehow involved in the observation and that your consciousness affects the result. That is not what is meant by observation in quantum mechanics. So when we as physicists talk about observables and measurements, we are talking about interactions with a quantum system. You don't need a conscious person staring at something for that interaction to happen. Now, there has been a lot of philosophical discussion around where measurement begins and ends, and questions like Wigner's friend are part of this history. But there's no evidence in physics, neuroscience, or anywhere else that human consciousness is required to collapse a wave function, or that your thoughts can affect quantum outcomes. And because quantum mechanics is already really difficult to explain, and because there are these genuine philosophical questions around interpretation, it has been very easy for those ideas to get picked up by New Age and quantum woo circles, and then turned into claims about consciousness, manifestation, and moving between realities. So dark matter is kind of doing something that's sort of in the middle of the New Age quantum woo and the actual reality of, ideas around the theory. So we have these very real ideas around superposition and many worlds theory, measurement, and then it is creating a fictional connection between those ideas and human consciousness. And as science fiction, I am fine with it. But we do still need to separate what quantum mechanics actually says from the fictional version the show has created.
The word you're looking for is a grain of sand on an infinite beach.
Now, there is one thing scientifically that did really annoy me, I'm going to be honest here, and that is the way the show uses Schrodinger's cat. You see, people misuse this idea all of the time, but the show uses it right at the start as part of the premise for making this jump from the quantum scale to the macroscopic scale. So Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment where you have a cat in a box with a radioactive source and a mechanism that will kill the cat if the radioactive atom decays. The atom has some probability of decaying and some probability of not decaying by the time you open the box. The way this often gets described is that until you open the box, the cat is both alive and dead, and that's basically how the show presents it. Like, it's exactly what he says. But that wasn't really Schrodinger's point. You see, he was using the cat as a paradox, because if you take the quantum description literally and then extend it all the way up to the macroscopic world, you end up saying something ridiculous like a cat is both alive and dead at the same time. But the whole point was that there is a problem when you try to take this quantum superposition and apply it directly to something macroscopic like a cat. We know from our own observations that the cat is either alive or dead. It's never both. So I did find it frustrating that the show takes the cat is both alive and dead line as if that's what Schrodinger was actually saying, because it then uses that as part of the basis for putting a human being into superposition inside the box. It doesn't ruin the entire premise for me. Like, as I said, I'm perfectly happy for them to play around with the physics they need to make the story work. But if you're going to use Schrodinger's cat as part of the explanation for that premise, I do think it's worth understanding what the thought experiment was actually trying to show. So by the end of the season, Jason eventually finds his way back to his world, and then we discover that there isn't just one Jason trying to get home. There are hundreds. All of these Jasons are the same Jason who was kidnapped and put into the box. They've just made different choices during the journey, and every one of those choices has created another branch. And I do think that that was a really interesting twist that, like, I haven't seen before, but it's also heartbreaking because they're all the real Jason. They are all the person who was kidnapped. They're all trying to get back to Daniela and Charlie. We just happened to follow one version of that journey. Like, we could have picked any one of those Jasons and followed him through the box, and then from his perspective, he would have been the real Jason trying to get home to his family. Joel Edgerton does a really good job of making that land emotionally. But the question for me is, why are there hundreds of Jasons and only one Daniela? This isn't really a science question. This is about what the rules of the show are setting up, and it depends on what they determine a choice is that is creating another world. So, does the choice have to be some significant life event? Maybe the reason we get hundreds of versions of Jason is because while he is traveling through the box, he is constantly having to make these very intense decisions, and each one sends him down another path. Or is it every choice that we make? Like whether you have tea instead of coffee, or if you take the bus one day instead of driving. Because if that's the case, then Daniela's world is branching as well. Every tiny thing that happens during the day would create more versions. So there shouldn't just be hundreds of traveling Jasons. There should also be hundreds of worlds containing versions of Daniela and Charlie that are almost identical to the world he is trying to get back to. And if we're talking about many worlds more literally, then it's even bigger than that, because it isn't really about human beings making meaningful choices at all. The branching comes from quantum events, which are happening constantly. So the show has the world's branch when it is narratively useful for Jason, rather than having to deal with like the absolutely ridiculous number of branches that you would actually get. Now, I can't help but think that there is a world with a Daniela and Charlie and a Jason too for every one of those Jasons, but I guess the key point is that they don't have the ampules to get there. Or maybe he can't access those worlds because they're not related to his choices. But could Daniela access them and then like deliver a Jason to each one? You know what I mean? If they had the formula for the drug, of course, which potentially Ryan and Amanda. Anyway, it seems that the box is specifically linked to the person, the box pilot. I have spent a pretty reasonable amount of time wondering what is actually happening to the box when they travel. So hear me out, right? The box always appears to exist in the same physical position in Chicago, but on a different many worlds axis. So it's in the same XYZ coordinates, the same time coordinate, but there is an extra axis that is the many worlds, where it's the axis of parallel, or not parallel, that's a different concept, alternate superposition realities. So when Jason opens a door into another world, where has that box come from? Does the box physically move into the new universe? Now, I would have expected it to only allow access to worlds where somebody also built the box, but it actually seems like using the box somehow means that a version of the box comes into existence in that world when the door is opened. When Jason and Amanda reach the world where Amanda decides to stay, the same world where Jason 2 strands Ryan, once the Jasons leave, is the box still there? It has to be for the story, right? Because if it's not there, there's no reason for Jason to have left Amanda with 2 ampules. But how is it still there? What is the box physically connected to, and how does more than one traveler's consciousness affect the physical manifestation of the box? Do you get what I'm talking about? Like, either a box exists always in the same spot in every world, or it travels with the box pilot, which suggests only one box. So how does it appear in another location, and why does it stay when they leave? These are the kind of thoughts that drive me crazy, truthfully. The box is clearly the same as, like, you know, like the speed of plot joke in Star Trek. Like, it exists where it exists when the plot needs it to, and we need to just accept it. I need to accept it. But I just wondered, like, did anyone else have this thought, and where did you kind of land with it? So overall, I just want to say that I enjoyed the idea of the story. I do think that we are oversaturated with multiverse as a theme at the moment, and the thing that we want to see is the other worlds. Like, the dramatic story is a backdrop to it, but if you're going to have us, or if you're going to give me like a box with infinite doors to other universes, then I want to see them. Like, I want like Rick and Morty, you know? But for this story, they will never be that different. We won't get like hot dog fingers or a world where everything's on the cob. So you have to really be into the story and the characters to care. And I'm going to be honest, there are certain things in terms of the characters and how things played out that I just didn't like. Some of the issues that I had with the book were resolved for me in the show, mostly because, like I said, I think Joel Edgerton did a really good job of making Jason likable and relatable. But some of what I didn't enjoy was still there. So it wasn't like a major, oh my God, it's so much better. But I did enjoy the show a lot more than the book. And I did really get into it more towards the end. Like, I really did start to kind of like get, you know, it was like up in my chair going like, come on. That was mostly also due to how they incorporated the side characters, because that gave me something new to engage with, and it gave me new aspects to the story. The truth is that my favorite character in the entire show is Ryan. Like, I think he's fantastic, and I loved Amanda as well, and I really enjoyed the two of them, and I think opening up those side characters also gave the TV show like somewhere else to go once it reached the end of the book. Which brings us to season 2, which is coming out the week that I'm posting this video. Now, I don't know where they're going to go with season 2, right? Like, season 1 ends where the book ends, with Jason, Daniela, and Charlie going into the box to find another world to live in. We know that Ryan and Amanda are now in the same world, and it looks like Ryan is trying to recreate the drug. We also know that Leighton is still out there traveling around through the, like, technically there's 2 Leightons, but we only saw one at the end of the final episode. And there are other box pilots that we've never met. Blair has also gone back into the box at the end of the final episode too. So there's still a lot of story there that can be explored, but the question is, what story? Now, personally, I'm much more interested in seeing what happens with Ryan and Amanda, or with the other people who are traveling through these worlds, than in dragging Jason, Daniela, and Charlie back into another crisis. I think their story has happened. But the whole premise of the show means that you can have different versions of those characters without necessarily continuing the exact story of the versions we followed in season 1. Like, I am interested to see what they choose to do, but I would love if they centered more on Ryan and Amanda and just found a new story arc that didn't involve the original Jason and Daniela. So, finally, what did I think of the show? I didn't hate it. I did enjoy watching it, particularly towards the end, and I did think that the TV adaptation made changes that worked much better for me than the book did. But I also, like, I'm going to be like, to be honest, I wouldn't put it up there with these science fiction shows that I think are absolutely incredible. Like, Apple TV has been doing some really good sci-fi, but for me, this isn't like Silo or Foundation level good. It's an interesting science fiction story, and I think that there is a lot here for me to be able to talk about in terms of, you know, like the way that it's using quantum mechanics. But it's not, it's also like not a bad show, like, at all. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's terrible, but I would kind of place it just like, it's somewhere in the middle in terms of what I like. I will end up watching season 2, I'm sure, out of curiosity, but I don't know how much it's going to grab me and make me want to stick with it. I mostly feel like I'm gearing more towards it because of Ryan and Amanda, rather than anything else that's happening. But that's just how I feel about it. What I want to know is how you feel about it. Did you enjoy the show? Are you looking forward to season 2? Who out of you has actually read the book, and how did you feel about it? Do you see the things that I'm kind of bringing up about the stuff that I felt I didn't quite enjoy? Like, did you get a similar feeling, or did you think something entirely different about it? But most importantly, where do you think season 2 will go? Now, if anyone is interested, I also recorded watch-alongs for every episode. So if you do want to like see my actual reactions in real time to each episode, you can find them on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Or, you know, if you just want someone to like watch the season along with virtually, they are available there. For next month's TV review, I'm going to do a rewatch of Three Body Problem. So I'll do like a season 1 recap and a science review of what's going on in season 1 before season 2 comes out. And currently for books, we are reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that Blade Runner is based on, even though it's fairly loose, but we will eventually watch Blade Runner as well, so we'll be able to do a kind of a better comparison between the two. I'm trying to get up to that before Blade Runner 2099 comes out, which I'm very excited about. Also, Philip K. Dick is like one of my favorite authors. I've said this many times before, and it's a weird one for me because it's like he's one of my favorite authors, but I don't have a particularly positive experience when I read his books because I feel like his books are the closest to an analysis of humanity and how we would behave with certain technology or certain things in our like a future society that is quite depressing. So somebody did bring up a little bit as well, because Total Recall is also based on a Philip K. Dick story, so is Minority Report. So but you know, I think maybe something that might be interesting to do is we should do like a breakdown of Philip K. Dick adaptations or something, or just the stories or the ideas. Let me know if that's something you'd find interesting. Anywho, do read along with this if you want to, and do a rewatch of Three Body Problem if you also are interested in being ready for those episodes that'll be coming out soon. Next week will be a movie review, and I actually haven't picked what the movie is yet, so if you have any recommendations, let me know. Now, if you like this, you might like my sci-fi review of Project Hail Mary, or you can check out the full playlist here. And guys, new deep dive video, lightsabers, go watch it. Leave your sci-fi recommendations of what you'd like me to cover in the comments, and of course, stay nerdy.